So speak life to the deadest, darkest night. Speak life, when the sun won't shine and you don't know why. Look into the eyes of the broken hearted, watch them come alive as soon as you speak hope, you speak love, you speak.
So, Pastor Dave mentioned basically after Peter gave his sermon, the reaction of the people was basically, they were like, what do we do? I wanted to jump ahead, and what did Peter actually say to them to cause them to actually change, repent, and then be baptized? So go to Acts 2, verse 22, starting at verse 22. Acts chapter 2, verse 22. So reading from verse 22 through 24, he said, Men of Israel, listen to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs which God performed through him in your midst, just as you yourselves know. This man delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. But God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. And moving forward to verse 36. Therefore, let all the house of Israel know for certain that God has made him, referring to Jesus, both Lord and Christ, this one Jesus whom you crucified. So, basically what we call this, or what we refer to this, as the good news. I got a kind of a good illustration that kind of shows the basic, simple, good news. And it's acrostic for heart. So the H is Jesus died a horrible death, and that's the symbol of the cross. E is for the empty tomb. So the tomb couldn't hold Jesus, he rose again. A is he appeared after his burial. R, it was recorded that women were actually the first witnesses. Why do you think that's important? Anyone know? Actually, in the days of Jesus, women did not have a legal right to testify in court. Anyone who would have made a story up that said they were witnesses would have been immediately, you couldn't have made that story up. Because it's kind of an interesting point. Only men could testify in court. And then finally, T is the transformation of the disciples. It's what Pastor Dave already talked about. The disciples, especially Peter went to denying Jesus. He went from kind of a cowardly type of person to being bold and actually accusing the whole house of Israel for this man's death. So it's a matter of heart. That's the good news. So if there was good news, what was the bad news? Why was it necessary for Jesus to die on the cross? So this illustration kind of tells why it was necessary. So basically at the beginning, so God made us to dwell with him. However, the first couple, Adam and Eve, sinned, and that caused a great gulf against God. We could no longer live in the holy love and communion with God. And then that brought death, pain, and suffering to the world. And then that illustrates that point. So, what you heard, next slide, the simple good news is on Jesus. What does it mean for us and you guys 2,000 years later? It's pretty simple. And how do we respond? So, can we trust something, really, that happened a couple thousand years ago? Or might we have some doubts? So what I thought I'd try to do quickly tonight is to maybe dispel some of the doubts that you guys might be hearing nowadays that are attacking the Christian faith. So these are what we would call blocks or roadblocks on achieving or going to the foot of the cross. Next slide. So, basically, there's three reasons why people reject Christ and the good news. One is they're ignorant of it. They're not aware of it. Two is they have a lot of pride. They don't want to say that they don't have sin. They don't want to say that they've offended God. However, the Bible contradicts that and said everyone's offended God. That's why Jesus came. That's why we need him. Or the third is they have a moral problem. They don't want to believe in Jesus. The next slide. There's basically four common misconceptions today about Christianity. Next slide. So the first misconception, Christianity must be proven scientifically. I'll accept Christianity when you prove it with the scientific method. Anyone ever heard that? Yeah? So let me demonstrate what the scientific method is. I've got a ball here. So if I take the ball and drop it from a meter, I know it goes down to the ground. It takes a certain amount of time to go 1 meter to the surface of this sanctuary. If I do it again from 2 meters, I can observe it takes a little bit more time. And I can actually sit here with a stopwatch and I can record how long it takes. So then I can observe, the velocity and the acceleration. So I can deduce that there's some force pulling on this towards the center of the earth. We know that today is gravity, right? So I can do that. I can test that. I can observe that right now. Can you guys test and observe this day the death on the cross and resurrection of Christ? You can't test that and you can't observe that right now. So the meaning is you can't prove it by the scientific method. The scientific method's controlled environment, it's experimental, and it's repeatable. How we test or how we judge truth by a historical event is by something different. It's by a method called the legal historical method. So from a legal historical method, what we need to look at is the written testimony, what was recorded in history, what did they say, what were the actions of the people who actually witnessed it. So in a court of law, these would be things that we would look at the testimony of the witnesses that were actually recorded or at the scene. Okay? So the fact that Christianity's central claims, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, actually can be analyzed by a legal historical method, actually is a proof that Christianity is different from other religions because other religions can't do this. Only Christianity can. Next slide. So, there are things, just before I jump to this, science does help collaborate, like, for example, archaeology, so they can go back and date certain artifacts and they can try to tie that to the time of Jesus. But that doesn't prove one way or another that Christ died and rose again. So the second misconception, I can't accept Christianity because there isn't enough evidence for me to be 100% sure that it's true. How would you respond to that? Do you need to have 100% evidence to believe in something? No. Man, you guys are the advanced class. That's awesome. So, next slide. You're right. You can't prove anything historically with 100% certainty. So, for example, we know George Washington was our first president, right? Well, we hope so. Otherwise, our education system is failing us. But George Washington, we weren't there, right? So you're relying on somebody else that recorded that in history, right? Next slide. Aha! Car. If you needed 100% proof of everything to do something, you wouldn't get in a car. Reason I say that, I drove by a sign today, Michigan traffic fatalities, 675 this year. So you get in a car every day. If you needed 100% proof that it was safe to get in that car, you wouldn't get in that car. But you actually do. Next slide. There's enough evidence to convince anyone who is not set against it, but not enough to bring anyone into the kingdom who will not come. It's by famous philosopher and physicist Blaise Pascal. Next slide. The historical evidence for Christianity is not absolute, but it is sufficient. Blue one or the red one? Who says the blue is the largest one? We got a couple people say the blue one's the largest one. How about the red one? Oh, we got way more people on the red one. Way more people on a red one, right? The red one looks bigger, right? It's reddish. Mauve. Next slide. So I'll come back to that. Truth is relative. It's a misconception. If you believe something, that is truth for you. Can you go back one? I had some people believe the blue one was the bigger one. Some people believe the red one was the bigger one. They're actually the same size. So some people believed one thing, some people believed another thing. And actually, neither of you were right. So, truth is truth, irregardless of maybe what one may believe. Next slide. So this is a nice liquid glass of, let's call it acid. Acid from chemistry class. If it was sitting on a table in our chemistry class, some kid ran in real quick, decided it was a nice cold glass of water and drank it. He believed it was water, believed it with all his might it was water, but drank it. What would happen to him? He'd be hurt pretty bad, right? But he really believed it was water. He believed it. I'm telling you, he really believed it was water. You can see that believing something doesn't necessarily make it true. Next slide. That was my point. The idea that truth is relative is actually self-contradictory. Truth is truth, irregardless of what someone may believe. And then finally, the misconception number 4, it doesn't matter what you believe as long as you are sincere in your faith. It really doesn't matter who or what you put your faith in. The important thing is that you believe, period. Next slide. Whoever here has been to Mackinac Bridge? Okay. So, anybody know how to get to the Mackinac Bridge? You're going to take I-94? Okay, I'm with you. I'm going to take I-94 west. Okay? Who's going to take I-75 north? Some people back there. You're going to take I-75 north? But I'm going to take I-94 and I'm going to get to Mackinac Bridge. That's what I believe. I'm going to go I-94 west all day, all night, all next week. I-94 runs east and west. If I go on I-94, am I on the right road to get to the Mackinac Bridge? I need to get onto the right road and take I-75 and go north, right? Okay. So, but I was really sincere. I was sincere on going I-94. So my point is, we're getting attacked from a lot of different areas. It's important to know and understand what you believe and who you believe in, and not believe all of the falsehoods and misconceptions that are out there. And you guys can talk more in your small groups about that. The Bible in Proverbs 14:12 says, "There is a way which seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death." In Mark 16:16, Jesus said, "He who has believed and has been baptized shall be saved, but he who has disbelieved shall be condemned." And then finally, going back to our illustration, at the beginning, after we sinned, we had a huge chasm between us and God. If we can go back to why Jesus came, Jesus on the cross became the bridge, the way for us to be able to go back to God by repentance and by faith in the object of Jesus Christ.